Okay, we should be streaming on LinkedIn now. Hopefully our guests can see us there. And for everyone joining us here today on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us for how to be a research writing rock star. Write better and get published faster. Dr. Dyke, welcome. You are actually in the UK, so you're on your home turf, I believe, or close to it.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. And I have a fantastic British accent, which I'm going to augment, especially for this event today. Scott, how are you doing? Everything okay?
Doing fantastic, fantastic. We are getting our live stream ready here. So for those of you who are joining us on LinkedIn, if you're having trouble seeing us or seeing the stream, we apologize for that, but we'll get the stream going the best that we can. If not, we'll make sure that the recording is available for you later. For those joining us here on Zoom, welcome and thank you for signing up and joining today's event. We're really excited to have everyone here.
Absolutely, absolutely. How you can become even better at writing your research, how to be a research writing rock star. Special welcome to all of those British people, English people, Scottish people, Welsh people, people from Northern Ireland who might be joining us for this event today. Ready to get started, I think, aren't we, Scott? Everything's good?
I think we're good to go. I'll keep working on the live stream here on LinkedIn for our guests there. So yeah, let's get started for our guests here on Zoom today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and over to you, Dr. Dyke.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you very much again, everybody. This is a presentation brought to you by Bentham Science Publishers. So Bentham, quick introduction, a leading scientific, technical and medical research publisher with more than 160 online and print journals, breaks down into 126 hybrid and 40 open access, 40 gold open access journals. So do have a look at eurekaselect.com. Do have a look at benthamscience.com if you've not seen the array of fantastic journals and ebooks, online and print books that Bentham Science Publishers has available. Also, we have a range, an array, a selection of information solutions for researchers across various scientific disciplines. Absolutely fantastic content. We do encourage you to have a look. And of course, Bentham is a member of a number of professional bodies, ALPSP, the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and the Committee on Publication Ethics. If you're listening to this and you are a librarian, welcome. In particular, we've got a bit of information here for you. If you would like to get access to Bentham journals at your institution's library, free, absolutely no obligation, won't cost you or your organization a single penny piece. You can scan the QR code on this screen to get access for a free 3-month trial, which gives you all access to Bentham content, the complete content, including more than 40 journals with impact factors. So this is a great way to get into Bentham content. It's a great way to learn about what Bentham Science Publishers have on offer and how we can help you and your institution achieve fantastic research results. And then, of course, after the 3-month period, you can decide whether or not you wish to continue with access to Bentham content. So there's absolutely no obligation whatsoever. But back to our event today. In our event today, we are going to be discussing 3 things. Absolutely. First of all, why English writing is so important for your research impact. That's the first thing that we will discuss. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can write more effectively in English in your research articles. Of course, we realize at Bentham, at SciTrain, that writing and publishing in English can be a major issue for researchers around the world. Of course, most research that's being done and published around the world is not being written and not being read by native English speakers. So those are our topics. And thirdly, we'll talk a little bit about what to avoid when writing, some common mistakes that researchers do tend to make when writing and publishing in English. Of course, writing is not a talent. It's something that you can learn. It's a skill. You weren't born being able to write effectively in any language, and in particular, English Lots of things have happened. Lots of researchers have come before you. You can learn from their mistakes. If you know some of the common errors that English writers tend to make in their academic work, you can, of course, avoid those mistakes in your own writing. So let's get going. Let's dive in. Let's begin by thinking about why English writing is so important for your research impact. We all get letters like this all of the time. Dear sir, dear madam, many thanks for asking whether we would like to publish your paper. It's coming from a journal editor. The paper's good and original, but we are simply not willing to publish it. Sorry about that. The good bits were not original and the original bits were not good. It's very unfortunate. A rejection letter, we get them all the time, don't we, everybody? But often, as you probably are well aware, international publishers like Bentham often reject excellent, fantastic academic research because of a range of issues. And you can see those issues here on the slide. Papers outside the scope, plagiarism, incorrect formatting, and poor English writing are top of the list. English is an issue, of course, for getting articles published in leading international journals. We always ask peer reviewers, don't comment on the English. If you think there's an issue with the English, send the paper back to us. We'll send it to the authors. We'll ask them to get the work edited. But of course, very often, peer reviewers, they do get stuck on the English. You don't want your fantastic academic research message to get buried in English language mistakes, as shown here in some of the crazy examples that we found online. And of course, there are very, very many. If you do not get your English perfect, correct, understandable, that message in your academic paper can get buried. So it's important that your academic language message is not buried in language issues. And that's really why we do these training sessions. That's why we're here, Scott and I at SciTrain. We are here to help with those issues. Right, Scott? We're always available. SciTrain has a range of courses, other webinar events that we're happy to do to help researchers with their English writing and publishing.
That's right. And we often feel like apologists. We're sorry that English is the de facto language around the world. It wasn't my decision. We have a huge advantage, Gareth and I, being native English speakers. So if you're in the UK or somewhere else and you're not a native English speaker, I know it's an extra challenge. It's a whole other layer of complexity that is added to your research work and your scientific communications. So we're sorry that you have to use English in those cases, but we're here to help, and we're here to help you find the best way to communicate your ideas in academic English so you can have more impact and reach a wider audience.
And you're listening to two different ways of speaking in English as well. And we'll come back to this in written form in a moment. Of course, when you hear me speaking, you're listening to British English. But when you are listening to dear old Scott speaking, you're hearing there a slightly different accent, right, Scott? Where are you from originally?
Well, it's a great question. I have a very flat accent. It's mostly Canadian, and most people say that Canadian English is very easy to understand because it's a bit flat and dull. But I've also lived in different places, so you'll hear just a little bit of Eastern American Baltimore English creeping in sometimes, or you'll even hear a wee bit of Australian from time to time. So yeah, bit of a mix, but flat and boring is my English.
We are getting some questions. We're getting some hands raised in the Zoom room. That's absolutely fantastic. We won't go on for too long, and we'll have lots of time for questions at the end of this event. So do keep your questions coming. Do put them either in the question box or in the chat box. And of course, you're going to get like participation certificates if you've registered for this event on Zoom, or indeed, if you're joining us live on LinkedIn and you'd like a certificate, do drop a comment into the LinkedIn comments. Do tag Bentham Science, do tag Scott, and I will achieve a bit more impact that way. And we'd, of course, be very, very happy to send you a certificate of participation at the end. What about English? Well, it's the universal language of scientific communication, of course. And unfortunately, as we're going to talk about in this event, academic papers often need to be well written and to a higher standard of English than you might find in some of those other written forms. But when you listen to us speaking, and you heard Scott speaking there a moment ago, we're not speaking in a grammatically correct way, not at all. In fact, probably only the Queen was able to speak English in a perfectly grammatically correct way. It's important to remember that, because you can communicate in English in spoken form very effectively without being grammatically correct. But in written English, it's very important to be correct. And we're here to help. We're here to show you, convince you that the writing process in your academic papers can be beneficial, and it can be fun, and it can be an intellectual activity in its own right. The question is how? I usually use these examples: Winston Churchill, Hadley Freeman, and A.A. Gill, some heroes of mine in academic and other written forms, because these colleagues, these famous people, these journalists were able to do fantastic things with English language. As JFK said about Winston Churchill, he was able to mobilize the English language and send it into battle. He could inspire people with the way that he wrote and with the way that he spoke. Hadley Freeman is a fantastic journalist. She taught me that the best way to write is exactly the way that you think. And we're going to come back to that in a moment, because it's great advice if English is not your native language. And A.A. Gill, unfortunately not with us anymore, a fantastic British food and travel journalist who actually was so dyslexic that he couldn't really write all that much without the help of a dictaphone, without the help of speaking into some medium and then writing down his thoughts. And that's key again if you're a non-native speaker. We encourage you to think about your research in English. Write down a little bit each day about your research in English, and that will really help you to overcome a lot of the barriers to publication success. And we'll see how that works in a moment. But how do you feel about writing in English? How do you start writing? Do you carefully make a plan beforehand, or do you just jump in and start writing? That's okay in your native language. But if English is not your native language, you need to be like Arnold in the middle of the slide. Arnold, of course, also not a native speaker. He's a bricklayer. He's got structure to his writing. You need to have that structure as well in your writing. You need a plan. And of course, we're here to help, learning from those who've come before, building a plan for your writing and putting that plan into action. Being a bricklayer with your academic writing is very, very important, which really brings us neatly on to our first quiz, our first stopping point in our training session today. Scott's going to jump back in to take control of everything at this point. Let's see if everyone's still awake. Scott, how are you doing?
Doing wonderfully well, Gareth. This is a quiz question that we love to ask people at our events. And the question is, on average, how much more time does it take non-English natives to read a scientific article? I'm going to launch the poll here in just a moment, and let's see what you think. How much longer does it take on average? Here we go. I'm launching the poll. Just a moment. Just ignore the title. It says poll 4. It's actually poll number 1. Do you think that it's 10% longer for a non-native to read, 30% longer, 60, or 90% longer to read a scientific article? What do you think? Answers are coming in hot, Gareth. Gareth, what do you think?
Well, people can use their own experience, but like, I know what it's like for me having to try to read articles in my second language. It takes a lot longer, and it's really a big blocker. Definitely. Scott, I know you're a Japanese second language learner. What about you?
Yes, the same for me. Probably off of the scale of this chart, it takes me much longer to read, especially scientific and technical articles in Japanese. It's very challenging even for me now, even though I've lived here a long time. So let's see how our poll results are now. Okay, we'll finish the poll and see what results we got. Again, please ignore the strange title. So looking at the results, 75% of our guests said it takes 30% longer to read a scientific article for non-natives. 25% of our guests said it takes 90% longer. You are correct. On average, it takes up to 90% longer for a non-English native to read a scientific article. So Gareth, what does that tell us about the way that we need to write our scientific articles
Well,
for
I
our
mean,
readers?
we're gonna talk about that next, of course, but it tells you, of course, that if your readers are not native speakers and it takes them almost 100% longer than it would take you, a native speaker, to read an article, you should keep your writing as simple as possible. You should make it as easy as possible. You should really try not to make things difficult for your readers, right? I mean, that's the message, I would say.
Exactly. And if it benefits non-native readers, if it's easier for them to read your article, imagine how much of a joy it will be to read for natives as well. So readability is key, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Back to you, Dr. Dyke.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Now, having concluded part one of our three-part event today, and we hope you're still with us, still awake, still online, still listening to this event live on LinkedIn. Fantastic. We're now going to talk a little bit about how you can write more effectively in English. We talked already now about why English is so important, but let's have a quick look about how you can write more effectively. And of course, you'll all be familiar with the famous IMRAD academic structure, but even though people will read your paper in this particular order, right? The title, the abstract, the introduction, the methods, results, the discussion, and conclusions. Scott, we've still got the poll like pinging up on the screen. I don't know. Can we get that? Can we get rid of that? I'm not sure if we can. I can get rid of that. Just close that. Okay.
Sure. Let me try to get rid of the poll there. Is it still sticking around for us there? Let's get rid of it then.
I think it's gone. I think it's gone. I think it's gone.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No,
sometimes they stick around longer than they should.
Yeah, reinforcing that learning outcome. It's great from an instructional design perspective. Don't forget,
apologies.
People are going to read your paper in this order: the title, the abstract, the introduction, the methods, results, the discussion, and conclusion. That's the IMRAD academic structure, built around 4 questions. Why did you do the study? How did you do it? What did you find? And what did your study mean? And really, one of the main messages of this particular training that we do, Scott and I, is this 4-question based technique. So if you forget everything else, have a think about these 4 questions, because if you answer them in sequence in your abstract and also in the main body text of your article, you will be a long way towards having an effective, well-written academic article. Why did you do the study? How did you do it? What did you find? And what does your study mean? Very, very important. This is the right order for putting your article together. And most people, of course, when they write a research paper, even if they don't realize it, they begin with the methods and the results. That's obviously the first place. Often you make figures, you make tables, you collect together your data, you talk about what you did in your study, the methods, before you go on and interpret, discuss, come to your conclusions, build that introduction, and then put the abstract and title together at the end. And don't forget, if you struggle with this and you think it's difficult maybe to put together an effective abstract for your paper, do have a think about those 4 questions. Have a listen back to this recording, have a look at the content in this presentation. It will really help you to be effective. And people also are confused in their writing about tense use. Keep it simple. Don't forget that most of your readers non-native speakers, so try to use as much as possible the present tense in your academic writing. It's appropriate for many of your sections, your introduction, your results, your discussion. Keep it simple, first person, active voice, present tense as you report information in your research. Of course, in the methods, those things happened in the past, so you'll be talking about those things in the past tense potentially, also in the future tense, the past tense in the discussion as you relate your research back to what's come before. But most of your writing can be kept as simple as possible. Very common question that we do get: which tense to use in those different sections? And we put together a quick table provide you with a few examples here. Which tense should be going in which section? Scott, some thoughts on the tenses? We don't like to get tense when we give these presentations.
That's right. Well, we added this slide because this is a question that we've had before. Very clever attendees said, hey, why do you only use the present tense in the introduction? Because I've seen the perfect tense in the introduction, and I realized they're absolutely right. There are times when we use the present perfect tense when we're talking about gaps in the literature. For example, previous studies have not yet addressed this gap. Therefore, our study will try to answer this question. So I wanted to put that in there for any attendees who are here tonight who might have asked that question at a past event. We do use various different tenses, even in the introduction. So just wanted to throw that in.
We are doing a quick taster session today and streaming it live on LinkedIn. But if you've enjoyed this, perhaps you're listening from a university or from a publisher and you'd like Scott and I to come along and do more of these kinds of presentations, Bentham Science, SciTrain, we are always delighted to show up at your institution online and provide you with further training. So if you need help with writing, we have lots of presentations in that area, right, Scott?
Indeed. We're always here to help. And writing, we know, is a key pain point for researchers. So always happy to help.
Awesome. So we'll have a look at some other tips here. How to write in English, a few tips. Going back to that slide I showed you before, try to think in English and write as you think. Tip number 1, very important. Remember those heroes of mine who couldn't really write. Thinking about your research, thinking about it as you do it, as you think in English, is very important. So writing a little bit every day, that's another great tip that we have, even if it's just a few minutes. Writing down your thoughts, never throwing anything away, putting bits of information into the different sections of your academic paper can be a huge step forward for many non-native speakers. And work with papers that you like and respect in your field. This really is one of my top tips for success. If you're working in a particular field, you have a target journal in mind, potentially, do go and get some papers from that journal in your subject area and see how native speakers structure their writing. See how they put together the figure captions, the introduction, the methods, and so on, because that will really answer many of the common questions that researchers around the world tend to have. How much information goes into the different sections? How can I write an effective figure caption, for example? Very, very important to get hold of papers that have been successfully published in your field, in those journals that you would like to see your research published in. And we talk to researchers all over the world, all of the time. Here are 6 features of plain English. Short sentences, no unnecessary words, using familiar words, active verbs rather than the passive voice, a clear style, and good punctuation. And of these, probably the most controversial comment, active voice rather than passive voice, we're going to come back to and talk about in a moment. But never, ever, 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 ever forget that most of your papers will be read by non-native speakers. And that makes publishing in English quite different to publishing in another language. If I write a paper in French, for example, not that I could ever do that, but most of the people who will then read that paper will be native speakers of that language. Not the case with English, and never forget that as a writing and publishing academic. We want one, that's right, just one complex idea per sentence. Short sentences, on average 20 words or less, is best. Keep the verb and the subject close together. We measured. Not lots of separation between your verbs and subjects, because people forget what you're talking about, or they have to reread the sentence many, many times. And active rather than passive. We concluded, I did this, our team did this, we show, rather than longer phrases, it can be concluded, things like that. Have a look at any paper published in Nature, published in Science, those high impact factor journals, the end of the introduction, you will always see a phrase, here we show, or words to that effect. In the active voice, setting the scene, the bridge between the introduction and the methods. You want to avoid jargon, short and simple words, and of course, no double negatives. Malaria is not uncommon. Of course, what you mean is that malaria is common. That's a double negative. They should be avoided in your research writing. As we signal that research question, keep a consistent order, repeat those key terms. Repetition is a very important tool in academic writing, keeping a consistent point of view, parallel ideas in parallel forms, and topic sentences with transitions and key terms. Scott and I have lots of content, lots of training, lots of other presentations in this area. If you are interested, just drop us a comment in the LinkedIn comments or get in touch with us at the end of this presentation, because you want to let your readers know what research question you are addressing. This sets up an expectation for the rest of the paper or the rest of the grant. Using explicit phrases, question words, stating your hypothesis, and giving people clear information about your variables and study design. Don't be emotional. I've edited lots of manuscripts where people talk about the most magnificent dinosaur, the most marvelous result, the amazing, fantastic potential of things like land use change. That's not really all that fantastic. You don't want to be emotional. You don't want to use superlatives. They are out of place in academic writing. But lots of non-native speakers, they come up when you look for synonyms on your word spell checker. You want to watch out for them, because they will give your readers the impression that you are being a little bit informal. Don't forget, in English, it's difficult for us to take adjectives and qualify them. We can't modify them. Often adjectives in English are absolute. So something is either sterile or it's not. Something is either unique or it's not. There are some exceptions. A good example is pregnancy. This has to be qualified with care, but a Petri dish is either sterile or it's not. It can't be very sterile, quite sterile, or fairly sterile. An object is unique, not very unique or quite unique, and so on. So word use, be very careful about your word use in English. And we've got some sentences here that may sound a bit funny. Have a look at these sentences and see if you can spot the problems with them. Why do they sound funny? Can you spot the issues? Let's see if Scott is able to spot any of the issues in these sentences. Scott.
I've seen so many examples like this in manuscripts that I've worked on with clients. I like this first one, using multiple regression techniques, the animals in experiment. Well, in this sentence, it sounds like the animals were using multiple regression techniques. I like that. They'd be very clever animals. I wonder what kinds of experiments they were involved in. That's a funny one. Number 2 is a good one too. In assessing the damage. Oh, we've lost your screen there, Dr. Dyke. Can we get back to your slideshow there, Dr. Dyke? Just your second tab there, I think. I think you're just on a different tab. There we go. That's the one. There we go. We're back. Number 2 is another good one. In assessing the damage, the plants exhibited numerous lesions. Okay. Sounds like plants were assessing damage. Again, very clever plants. These are what we call dangling modifiers, I believe, right? If I remember my English grammar training. And they make the sentence very ambiguous. It's another perfect example of what we were talking about earlier. As you mentioned, Gareth, keep verbs and subjects and verbs close together and keep them short, especially keep the subjects of the verb simple and keep it close to the verb. It makes everything just so much more easier to understand. And these examples, or these sentences, are perfect examples of that. Shorter sentences, simple subjects and verbs. Really funny. I like these. I hope the audience caught these as well.
Yeah, and sorry, my screen dropped off there for a moment. I don't know what happened, but there we go. That
Okay, we're
happens
back.
in these live events. So in terms of learning about mistakes that you can avoid making as an academic writer, we've reviewed a number of them, but very, very important and a big issue for many non-native speakers is the issue of academic plagiarism, which of course is where you take somebody else's ideas, their processes, results, or words, and you don't give appropriate credit. And many people, nobody does this. Very few people do this on purpose, of course, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But lots of mistakes creep in to academic writing. Lots of errors creep into manuscripts that get sent to international journals because, of course, often people are simply unaware of the errors that they're making, which brings us to our quiz number 2. Scott.
Well, this is a question that we often get, and it can be confusing. So let's see what our audience thinks. Is it possible to plagiarize yourself? Yes or no?
Very, very important because I've been caught out by this myself in the past. Let me tell you, in a previous publication that I put together a number of years ago, if you don't know that there's something that you shouldn't do, that's not an excuse for doing it. It's like, you know, I didn't know that it was illegal to do that, Your Honor. So, you know, not knowing about something that you shouldn't do is no excuse for doing it. So it's very important, this particular section of our presentation.
Well, let's see what our audience said today, Gareth. We'll share the results here. Hopefully the poll will go away this time. 80% answered, yes, it is possible. That's actually the correct answer. It seems a little strange. It seems counterintuitive, but it is possible to plagiarize ourselves, isn't it? Dr. Dyke, explain to us how that happens. How is it possible to plagiarize your own work?
It's possible to plagiarize your own work because, of course, when you publish something, a figure, a table, a piece of data in one of your own publications or a co-authored publication, unfortunately, people often think that they own that. They think, I made that figure, I made that map, I took that photograph, I own it, I can reuse it in any of my previous publications. And actually, that's not the case. If you've used something in a publication, conference abstract, journal publication, something that you've pre-printed, even your thesis, something that you've got online somewhere, you should cite yourself when you reuse that content subsequently, right, Scott?
Absolutely, and get permissions as well. And if this is confusing for us, then I know it is for many people, including myself. Please join us at our event next week. We're going to be having a special event on ethics, and we'll be dealing with these kinds of issues exactly. How to avoid self-plagiarism or any kind of accidental plagiarism. So join us 1 week from tonight. It's 1 hour earlier than this event, but it's 1 week from today. Please join us then, and we'll go through some issues to avoid in terms of plagiarism, self-plagiarism, and other ethics issues.
We'll put the link to that event in the chat on the Bentham LinkedIn so that you can jump in, you can register for that. Of course, research integrity, big issue in academic publishing. Lots of people talking about it all of the time at those big industry conferences, but often those conversations are between publishers and they're not involving the researchers who are actually the end users of the content and the people creating the research papers that get published in fantastic journals like those published by Bentham Science publishers. So what we do, Scott and I, is we really try to engage with researchers, help them with their problems and issues, and hopefully solve a number of problems in research integrity at the same time, because self-plagiarism is a big issue. You can't use data from a previous study without making your readers aware of that. You've got to cite yourself because you can steal from yourself. And that's what happened to me. That's another story which I'll tell you another time, but you certainly can't submit a manuscript for publication that contains data, conclusions, or passages that have already been published. You've got to cite your previous work. And of course, goes without saying, you can't publish multiple similar papers about the same study in different journals. That's a big no-no. And we talk about salami slicing. We talk about breaking down research, the pressure to publish those least publishable units in our ethics presentation. So do join us for that, as Scott mentioned, 1 hour earlier than this one. So if you're joining us from Japan, joining us from China. You don't have to stay up so late. Just a week from today. Self-plagiarism is any attempt to take any of your previously published text, papers, or research results and make them appear your own. Right, we've talked about why English writing is so important for research impact. We've talked about how, a few tips, not very many, and we've got lots more where that came from. So do get in touch if you'd like to learn more. You'd like us to give a presentation at your university for your research group. We'd love to do that. Let's talk finally about what to avoid when writing. And these are the most common errors in English: plagiarism, tenses and switches, spelling conventions, and inappropriate word use and word use confusion. Plagiarism, of course, we've talked about already, so we won't go back to that. And we've already touched upon this particular issue, Scott and I, in the way that we speak. There's definitely differences in the way that the British people speak compared to those Americans, but there are also many spelling differences as well, as you'll all be well aware. Common differences in US and UK spelling. I get terribly confused. How about you, Scott, between these differences in spelling?
Even as a native speaker and also being a Canadian, we're sort of halfway between British English and American English. We sound more like Americans, but we spell more like you Brits. So it's easy for us to get confused as well. And then if you're working for global organizations that use English, you have people from all around the world, from all different parts of the world, using different types of English, different spellings, different word choices. It can be confusing even for native speakers.
Did you know, for example, that even the color gray has a difference in spelling between the US and the UK? It's important to check your journal guidelines. They probably will say, we don't mind, just be consistent, because there's nothing that annoys an editor, a reader, more than seeing those differences in spelling popping up all over your document. You also want to avoid unnecessary words that make your science sound sloppy. It has long been known that correct to an order of magnitude, almost reach significance at the 5% level. Keep it simple. Why say analogous when you can say similar? Why say utilize when you can say use? And why say terminate when you can just say, I brought the experiment to an end? Unnecessary words really do make your writing longer, harder to read, harder to follow. My personal favorite, be that as it may. I used to work with a French-Swiss researcher who put that at the beginning of almost all of his sentences, and it made it really tough to follow. That versus which, these two words can help to make your meanings and relationships clear, but we do need to use them correctly. The lawnmower, which is broken, is in the garage. The lawnmower that is broken is in the garage. So is the lawnmower that works. Whereas the lawnmower which is broken is in the garage is not okay. And some of these language rules you just have to learn, or tune into some of our other events where we dive in much greater depth about English grammar and English language use, and hopefully we make it fun. Extra words, redundant words, that's a small in size individual. You don't need the in size, because small on its own is sufficient. That box is rectangular in shape. You don't need the in shape. Rectangular on its own is sufficient. That man over there is blue in color. You don't need the in color. Blue on its own is enough. So that car is blue is perfectly okay. And one of the ones that we see often in academic writing, my hypothesis is tenuous in nature. Well, you can just delete those unnecessary words. And by the way, one of the best ways to catch these kinds of things in your own academic writing is indeed to read your work out loud. I use a mirror, or I talk to the cat. I read my work out loud. I make sure that there are no redundancies, no missing words or phrases. And what we've got here, we're not going to read them out because that would be boring, but a series of slides that provide you with practical tips for scientific writing. So do get in touch with us. Do drop a comment in the LinkedIn chat. Any participants joining us on Zoom will also get access to a recording of this event as well as a certificate. You will be able to have a look at these tips for academic writing in more detail, because there are many commonly confused words in English. And here are a few on this slide. We do recommend a standard dictionary. Sounds really boring, but very, 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 very important, as well as Roget's Thesaurus of English Words and Phrases, so that when you use a word, you get the meaning correct. You can see a number of examples here on the screen of words with quite different meanings, but that seem very similar. And a very common error, by the way, is in the use of data, which of course is plural. Data were collected rather than data was collected. A datum was collected would be the correct use of that turn of phrase. And we see that often in academic writing, especially in the editing work, that we do lots of words coming at you on the screen in this slide. Not to worry, we're not going to dwell on them again. Have a listen back to this recording. Have a look at the content that we provide. Have a look at benthamscience.com. Have a look at our website, Sidetrain Global. You will be able to get into a lot more of these issues, get access to a lot of training and other content that we do provide. Again, tips and tricks for academic writing, different things that we talk about in our presentations. Scott and I can talk for hours about the use of punctuation, about the use of commas, how to separate clauses and subclauses. If you're thinking that's going to be deathly dull, why don't you give one of our training sessions a spin, right, Scott? We have several available for researchers online, ready to go, right?
We do, and of course, look out for our upcoming Bentham events as well. We tend to do events quite frequently, at least once a month, and recently we've been doing even more. So please visit our LinkedIn page to get the latest events, and also you can review past events as well on our YouTube channel. So yeah, keep posted for upcoming events with Bentham.
Every so often, we also have a newsletter which you can sign up for on the website, get the latest news about what's happening at Bentham, the great research that we're publishing, and the fantastic training events that we do. It's important to be more or less specific most of the time. Avoid cliches like the plague. Verbs has to agree with their subjects. Prepositions are not words to end sentences with, and don't start a sentence with a conjunction. Is it wrong to ever split an infinitive? Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are usually unnecessary. No sentence fragments. Contractions aren't good style and shouldn't be used in formal writing. Do not be redundant. Do not use more words than necessary. One should never generalize. One-word sentences. Eliminate commas that are not necessary, and never use a big word when a diminutive one would suffice. Kill those exclamation points. Use words correctly, irregardless of how others use them. Understatement is always absolutely the best way to put forth earth-shaking ideas. Use the apostrophe in its proper place and admit it when it's not needed. And who needs rhetorical questions, right, Scott? What's the point? What's the point?
These sound even funnier when I hear them in your polished UK English, which is just perfect for tonight's event.
Awesome. And don't forget, everybody, to proofread carefully to see if you any words out in your writing. That's also very, very important. I usually do it, as I said, to one of the cats we have here. Read out my work out loud. Best way to catch those unnecessary words. Best way to catch those punctuation mistakes. Best way to catch any meanings that are not clear. And really, on a serious note, it really is very important to show your work to others, especially your method section, as we talk about in our other training events. The main reason, apart from English, for academic article rejection tends to be issues and problems with your method section. So do take time to show that to other colleagues. Ask them, have I put enough information into my method section for somebody else to be able to repeat the study? Well, we've made it almost to the end of our event today. Thank you for sticking with us. Fantastic. Why English writing is so important for your research impact, how to write more effectively in English, and what to avoid, some ideas, what to avoid when writing some of those common mistakes. Scott.
We'd like to welcome librarians to our event. If you're joining us tonight, remember that you can get our free trial for your institution's library. It's 3 months, no obligation. So if you're a librarian or if you are a student at an institution and you'd like to see Bentham journals in your library institution, then please reach out. You can scan the QR code and get a free trial.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And of course, if you're not following Bentham on our variety of social media channels, why not? Do get involved. We've got Facebook, we've got a blog site, we've Twitter, well, the site formerly known as Twitter, of course, as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, and we're on academia.edu. So do get in touch. And I think with that, we'll just say thank you very much for joining us in our live event. We, of course, have time for questions. So let's have a look and see if we have any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A. Scott, do we have any questions?
Great. Well, we do have some questions that came before the event by email. So those of you who emailed your questions to us, we'll send you proper written answers to those. Thanks, for example, to our guest, B. Puri, who sent 3 very good relevant questions, which we'll answer by email. And if anyone tonight has any questions to ask here live, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. I have a question for you, Dr. Dyke, while we're waiting to see if any questions come in. If you could choose your one tip from tonight, if you could just choose one, what would be your top tip for being a research writing rock star from all the tips that we showed tonight, or even something that we didn't mention tonight? Is there a number one for you?
Oh, good question. Yes, I'm glad you asked me that. That's really an interesting question. I think my top tip would be to find yourself an academic that you respect, that you like, that you follow in your field, that's writing and publishing successfully in leading journals and is a native speaker. So in your field, you'll know like who the leading academics are, of course. You'll be able to identify them. You'll be able to go to their websites, download some of their papers, have a look at how they are writing and structuring their work. And that was really the best advice I was given as a PhD student. You want to write a paper for this particular journal? Well, great, Gareth. Go and find a paper published in that journal that does something similar to the kind of paper that you want to write. So that's great advice because it shows you what you need to do to be successfully published in that journal. So that would be my top tip. It also answers many questions. We get so many questions, Scott and I, that are like, how much to put in the title? What should my title look like? How many words for different sections? How many bits of information should go in the methods? And if you have a target journal in mind, you've got some papers from that journal that are successfully published, written by native speakers, you can answer many of those questions for yourself. So that would be my top tip for rock star success in academic writing and publishing. Absolutely.
That's a great suggestion, and that's echoes what I always tell my students and clients, which is reading is the secret writing skill. I know it seems kind of counterintuitive, but of course, as you mentioned in your slide with the bricklayer, with Arnold the bricklayer, the last line in that slide is, so we can learn from those who came before us, and that's so true. Reading really is the secret writing skill. By following someone who's writing successfully, especially a native speaker, then you can learn so much from example. I love that. Yeah.
One of the fantastic things. Sorry, Scott, go on.
Please go ahead, Dr. Dyke. Please go ahead.
This video is going to be embedded on LinkedIn, so you can share it with your friends and relatives. You can point people back to the Bentham LinkedIn if you want to re-listen to this event. Sorry.
Not at all. My favorite is the KISS rule. Keep it simple, stupid. Because again, the majority of your readers will not be natives. And even if they are, they'll appreciate a readable manuscript that's easy to follow, that's clearly linked, that's cohesive. The sections all link together. It's simple. The sentences are short and clear subject-verb agreements, and close together subjects and verbs. All of those things will make your manuscript so much more readable. And many people ask, well, won't that make me seem less intelligent because my writing is so simple? Not at all. Simplicity is actually the mark of intelligence. So if you are dealing with more complex material and very technical scientific content, all the more reason to keep your writing simple, because then your difficult concepts and technical ideas will be easier for people to understand. So simplicity, keeping writing simple and clear, will never make you look less intelligent. It will only make you seem more intelligent to readers and more importantly, to editors and reviewers. So keep it simple.
Lovely. I like that. The KISS rule, the Gene Simmons
KISS
rule
rule.
of academic writing. Keep it simple.
Perfect for a Rockstar event. Yes.
There you go. See, that was how we bring the event back and bring it round and close it off by mentioning my favorite rock star, Gene Simmons, the lead singer of KISS.
We do have a final question just under the wire here. How can I find perfect writers, for example, on social media? Great question. How to find the writers that you mentioned earlier, Gareth? Where can we find great examples of good writing?
Well, good writing is very subjective, isn't it? And what I might find to be good writing would be different to what Scott finds and enjoys to be good writing. What I should say are successful academics, people who've successfully got their work published in those big international journals. Those are the kinds of people that you want to be searching out and targeting with your own writing. So have a look at those, as we mentioned before, leading academics in your own field. Have a look in Nature, have a look in Science, have a look at the big journals, the well-respected journals in your field. British Medical Journal, the Lancet, if you're a medical researcher, for example, Journal of Geographical Sciences, where you want to get your work published, and then look for native speakers who have their papers published in those journals and copy their style. Go in and see how they write an introduction. Go in and see how they write their figure captions and their methods and their results, and so on. As we talked already in this event, it all starts with the methods and the results. Those are the easiest places to start writing a research paper. Usually you finish an experiment or finish a study, you put together figures, you put together tables of data, and then you describe them. And that's how you begin to structure out the shape of your research article, I would say. Nice question.
Great question. Thank you. If there are any other questions from our guests tonight, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, we'll finish there, and we welcome your questions by email. Again, those who sent us email questions before the event, thanks for those. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. And thank you, Dr. Dyke. I always learn so much from doing these events from you. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Any final comments for our audience tonight, Gareth?
I think it went well. This is our first attempt at live streaming one of these events, and so hopefully it was enjoyable and everybody learned something. And thank you very much, Scott, for all of the technical expertise and the instructional design and development of these courses. We're a team, we're SciTrain. We work with publishers, including with Bentham Science. Do have a look at the other content and training that we have available. So thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.